Woodward's this week, $5.49. And the Taste of Britain still going on. Your chance to win a trip for two to London with British Airways. Come on in.
Woodward's has it all. We're coming through for you.
Good morning. It's a funny thing, you know. For years, education in British Columbia has taken heavy criticism on waste, overstaffing, feather bedding, and quality of the product. But has the government gone too far? Is it going too far? Take SFU, for instance, where the swim team has been snuffed out. And here's what the coach is going to tell you about the future.
What does it mean to you personally to see this team go down the drain?
It means an awful lot to me because that's all, you know, they're all my kids. I've got over 200 kids out there, and I've got a lot invested in all of them. I'm very hard on them because I believe that they're the best, and I want them to be the best. And when, you know, if you take a child away, it sounds kind of melancholy or whatever the word is. You know, take children away from their parents and say to the parents you can't have them anymore and you're no longer parents. It's kind of heavy on you.
And remember, when SFU was started, one of the great pitches was this was going to be our great athletic university. It was the only university with kind of paid coaches, I suppose. We're not just going to look at the swim team this morning, although we will, but we're going to talk to the head of SFU, Dr. Bill Saywell, who will spell out for us the kind of cuts and slashing that he's had to do under the budget restrictions and what lies ahead for education and standards, in particular in relation to SFU. And then, all of a sudden, a Liberal has come out of the back rooms, out of the shadows. His name is George Van Roggen, chairman of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. He's the guy who brought out the report about free trade with the Yanks. It's not a question of no truck or trade with the Yanks. It's a question maybe of free trade with the Yanks for us to survive. Mulroney's people are obviously interested. So George Van Roggen is going to spell that out to us this morning. And then for my generation, we're going to meet a fine man called Bill Alexander. Oh, first of all, we're going to tell you what the story's about. Take away, Willie, and break up the little plug. This is a scene from the Spanish Civil War days, 1936 to 1939, when the Nazis and the fascists made their big move to start World War II, a war about which today's generation knows next to nothing, the testing ground for the Second World War. And now here's Bill Alexander, the former commander of the British Battalion in Spain, part of the famous International Brigade. We'll talk to Bill Alexander, and we might whip up a couple of survivors of the Mac-Pap Battalion who's still living around here. But we're going to start this morning with the sad story of the SFU swim team and my colleague, Steve, what's his name, Wyatt, after the break.
Jack, this is an illustration in a meat cleaver approach to budget cutbacks. Here at Simon Fraser University, you'll remember last September when President William Saywell announced severe cutbacks in a few select programs. He chose only a few because he said he wanted to maintain the quality in the remaining programs here. Well, one of the major casualties is the athletic department. They have to cut their budget by 40% by 1987. And one of the big victims is the swimming team, an internationally renowned team that will be eliminated completely by the end of March.
It sure would be nice, Dwayne, if we could see your ankles when you're kicking. Dina, don't place your hand on the water, eh? Let it drop down. It takes energy to do little patty cake type of stuff. And let it drop down.
Paul Savage has been coaching the SFU swim team for the last 19 years. The swimmers count themselves among the most successful of the university's varsity teams. They rank in the top 3 in Canada, among the top 100 in North America. Under Savage, they have won 12 consecutive national championships. But achievements aside, the team is drowning.
I think, number one, it's a major blow to Simon Fraser. I think it's a major blow to Canada because that was our outstanding sport in this past Olympics, I think it's a major blow to just all athletics. If you took all the medals that our team has won internationally since 1969 and combined all the rest of the medals of all the sports at Simon Fraser, they still wouldn't equal the number of medals that we'd won in swimming.
For the athletic department, it was not an easy choice, but swimming became the target in accordance with the president's directive to avoid across-the-board cuts. By wiping out swimming, they save $80,000 this year, and they argue there are other places for the swimmers to go.
The reasons behind the cut were two. One, we felt that the cost per participant was as high as any other sport on campus. And secondly, we felt that if a sport was to be cut, there were programs within the Lower Mainland area that would provide, I don't know, suitable replacements for the swimmers that would lose their competition.
In spite of how we did as a country at the last Olympics in swimming, was there an attitude perhaps that this was one of the less glamorous spectator sports that could survive a cut without any public backlash?
That may have entered into it. Again, all university athletics don't draw particularly large crowds. So for the sake of a few hundred people, that wouldn't have been, a basis for the decision to be made.
Paul, where does the swim team stand now then? I mean, is there any future for it?
Let me go back on something that Mike had to say previously, in that on the participant, we were more costly than the other sports on a per capita basis. The answer is we probably are, because we go to national championships. If you took other teams and sent them to national championships, my feelings, although the books are not at my fingertips, are going to be that the other sports are going to be far more costly. Number two, so far as having other programs within the Lower Mainland area where our kids can go to, I don't agree with that one. There's one pool 6 miles away from our campus, and it costs you over $1,000 a year just to have membership in that organization. Other than that, there are only 2 other senior clubs in the Lower Mainland area, Canadian Dolphins, $1,000 a year for membership only, and the University of British Columbia. So university students, you're pushing them on either to University of British Columbia or University of Victoria, which is taking good students. It's taking funding, which this university is all university needs by virtue of the fact that you're sending a certain number of people away from the university.
This is not the only cut. 40% of the athletic department's budget has to be cut in the next 3 years.
That's correct. That's correct, Steve.
Aren't you sending, not you, but isn't the university putting itself back into the bush leagues and athletic competition?
That's precisely what is happening. I mean, the most apparent tragedy from this cut is that, one, athletes lose the chance to compete in their chosen sport, and secondly, for some of these individuals, it's the only opportunity they have to benefit from a university education. The loss of scholarships, the loss of their mentor, the fact that the programs as successful as our swimming program has been is going to be cut. And the question then must be asked is, is this in fact the last cut? If not, what's to go next? And what is going to be the basis for those decisions? And it's not only the athletic departments, it's the entire university that faces this problem.
Peggy, don't spend so long time breathing, eh? You're over here like this and so forth. Sue, are you trying to shake hands with somebody back here? Why don't you put your hand in, go all the way through to the catch point and start coming through. Your left hand, not your right, but your left hand.
Coach Savage's style may be best reflected in his name, but beneath that drill sergeant exterior there is a man who a lot of swimmers over the years have thought of as another father.
Savage is like our father. He does this, every day of the week. He's here at 5:45, and he doesn't have a family of his own, and he looks after and takes care of each one of us.
Well, I know when I first started swimming up here, we didn't get along at all. I was in his office getting in trouble all the time. This is my 3rd year up here, and now I have more than the utmost respect for the man. He's done a lot to help me out, more than just swimming, but in all aspects of my life. He's been a really important influence.
I've been on a college deck since 1958, 26 years. And that's what my life has been. My guess is that I've probably completed 40 years of work here, because I generally work 12 to 13 hours a day during the winter months. What
does it mean to you personally to see this team go down the drain?
It means an awful lot to me, because that's all, they're all my kids. I've got over 200 kids out there, and I've got a lot invested in all of them. I'm very hard on them because I believe that they're the best, and I want them to be the best. And when you know, if you take a child away, it sounds kind of melancholy or whatever the word is. You know, take children away from their parents and say to the parents you can't have them anymore and you're no longer parents. It's kind of heavy on you.
What do you think you'll do now?
Well, I'm going to work hard with this team and see if we can't do a job. I'm going to work hard to see if we can't somehow get an influx of support in a way that will stem the university or the government from cutting us to try and keep the team going. It's not just my program, as Mike said. You know, there are several different programs here on the campus that have had to suffer underneath the axe. It's got to stop someplace. It's just like, you know, a flood and erosion and so forth. Unless you dam up the river, you're going to lose more land and more land and more land. So I think that the principles, which I've always been a principle type of person, is most important. It's got to stop someplace. And if it doesn't stop with me, who's it going to stop with? I walk across the campus and several people have said to me, gee, we're really sorry to hear about you in swimming. And I say, you shouldn't necessarily feel so sorry about me because I know where I am. You don't know if you're going to get it next or not.
Thank you, Mark. Go!
The swim team is racing now for its very existence. They are depending on private donations, and they have until the end of March to raise a lot of money.
On November 17th, which is the date of the varsity alumni swim meet, we are going to kick off the swimming program's endowment drive. We can look at it on say, the basis of raising $80,000 every year for the next umpteen years in order to keep the program alive, but that in itself presents a real problem in terms of recruiting and a host of other things.
That's the budget every year. Is it $80,000 a year to keep the swim team going at its current status?
Give or take $1 or $2, yeah.
That's right, yeah. But what we would like to do, and again, this is going to be a lot of hard work, is raise $1 million, thereby ensuring that the swimming team will be here as long as the university functions.
Why should anybody care about losing a swim team?
Well, we've brought a lot of good publicity to the university. We've won a lot of national championships. We've produced a lot of successful people in the world. I don't know. We have a good time. We're very successful.
What do you think about the future? Do you think the team's going to be able to stick it out?
I sure hope so.
In the studio is President Bill Saywell. How would you like to put that in perspective? We, of course, wanted to show that kind of dramatic bit because athletics was one of the great things about SFU. Would you like to put that in perspective in relation to the other cuts you're being forced to make?
Jack, let me just give you a few statistics. Over the past 4 or 5 years, our funding per student has gone down by about 30%. Last year, we were the first faculty in the history of universities in this country since the Depression to take a salary cut. My faculty voted for a salary cut to save jobs, and so did other employee groups. Tuition has gone up 116% in the past 4 or 5 years. We've lost 100 full-time equivalent positions in our faculty. We are beginning to lose people not only in the faculty but in all of the other things that make a great university go because we've fallen into the bottom half of the salary scale in this country. We're 10% off the Vancouver market in non-academic jobs. Something had to give, and my proposition to the university was very simple. It was either we just continue to erode everything down to the point where all our good people go, where we have no quality anywhere, or we make some tough choices. I then made some of those choices myself. In the athletics area, I said, you've got to give up $250,000 in the 85-86 budget year. You people decide where you want to excel. Where do you want to put the remainder of your resources? Do you want it in wrestling, where we had 5 young people in the Olympics in LA, 2 of them winning medals? Or do you want to put it in football or swimming? You choose. And the choice they made was swimming. I regret it as much as anybody else. But if higher education continues to get a low priority, relatively, in all of the demands on the public trough, and I recognize there are many, and I recognize the economic plight of British Columbia, then we in the universities and our leadership simply has to make those kinds of tough choices.
More tough choices with President Bill Saywell of SFU after the break. Even Jim Matkin of the Employers' Council says that the budget cuts, Dr. Saywell, seem to be causing more harm here than anywhere else. Your colleague Howard Petch in Victoria says no sense in some of the cuts. I'm sure that your colleague at UBC, Bill Peterson, says and has said much the same thing. What's the answer? Do you as a university president just have to sit there and say, okay, the money isn't there, they cut our budgets, we must accept a reduced standard of education for fewer people?
I've got to do two things, and I am doing two things, and my other presidential colleagues are also. One is to take the reality of what we have in the university and make the tough decisions that will attempt to have the institution survive, and survive with as much quality and effectiveness as it can. That's the one issue. The second issue is to try to use whatever talent and time I have to lobby the public, the media, business community, and government directly with the following proposition, and it's really a very simple proposition. It is that we recognize the economic reality of this province. I mean, that's the given. We're not being irresponsible in that sense. But within all of the demands at the public trough, we should have a higher priority in the interest of a socially strong and economically developing society. You know, Jack, if you look almost anywhere in the world where you have reasonably conservative governments in the past few years, they are throwing money into the educational area, particularly higher education. The California government has really been supporting that because they see that in part is the answer to the long-term economic prosperity of the country. We're doing exactly the reverse in this province, and it's not in the interest of the province.
Now, the money, of course, comes from the provincial government. The provincial government is strapped. God knows, courtesy hearings just now are quite sensational in their own particular way. But in the meantime, you have no hope of making the government change its mind, have you? You've got to try and get you're really acting as a political lobbyist to get the government to change its mind, to change its priorities.
Well, I still have some optimism. You mentioned Jim Matkin's speech yesterday. We have been getting tremendous support in the business community. I have had, and I think that's really turned around in the last year, chief executive officer and senior people in the Vancouver business community constantly now saying enough is enough in higher education. We've got tremendous media coverage, excellent media coverage. The fact that the two universities, UBC and U of I, have had tremendous fall-offs in first-year enrollment from kids in the interior, I suspect government is now beginning to hear from the parents of those young people who can't come to university for financial reasons.
In other words, we're going back to the old British Columbia attitude where kids who live close to the major centres could get the education and could live at home and perhaps scrape by, but kids from up country are right out of luck.
There's no question that that's
That may be your strongest sales pitch.
Well, it may be, but I'm optimistic. I've had several meetings with the Premier. The Premier listens attentively. I don't in any sense argue the basic financial issue. It's the priority issue. And
in what areas of education? I mean, if you were selling it to me, I would say, okay. I mean, I've made all the snide cracks that anyone can make about the education system in the halcyon days. For instance, make it 10, 20,000 unemployed BAs. Are our universities prepared to fill the needs that will help us be a more efficient, productive province? And what are these needs?
Well, universities should not be vocational schools. There are technological institutes and vocational schools to do that. Universities should be instructing in a broad array of disciplines. Certainly, student preference has begun to shift over years toward things like computing science and so on. We're trying to accommodate those pressures and those demands and do a good job. One of the things that the public often doesn't see on a day-to-day basis with university life is the research we do. We're doing research in SFU, if you want to talk about economic development, that is absolutely critical for the long-term health of the forest industry, for instance. We have one of the finest pest management control units in higher education anywhere. That research ought to be supported to the fullest possible thrust.
Are you in danger of cutting these prime programs?
Well, we have cut, you focused on the athletic area. That was simply one area of cuts. I had to also recommend a third of the Center of Performing Arts be eliminated.
That was where some of the sincere kids turned up with black armbands dripping with blood.
It's not very pleasant being a university president these days when you have to cope with these realities. I must say, on the other hand, that the institution and the people, including those who've been hurt, have been very, very civil and
But
reasonable.
performing arts is obviously a kind of not a frill program. It's a program that does not warrant priority at the moment.
Performing arts, the arts generally, the humanities are absolutely central to the well-being of any civilized society.
Now, okay, give me some of your kills for the 85-86 operating year.
Well, I'm not going to repeat your word kill. We've done a lot of changes. We've collapsed one faculty, and we're trying to collapse. These are recommendations yet. They have to go through the legislative process of university. We've changed some organizational structures by eliminating one faculty and putting it together with another. We have suggested the end of the instruction in Russian, a program in Russian rather, a program in German, a program, 2 area studies programs in Middle Eastern and African and Latin American. We have taken 1/3 of the budget of the Center for the Performing Arts. We have taken $1 million out of continuing faculty appointments in a whole number of departments. We have eliminated all kinds of smaller units and individuals that don't have time to mention.
You were telling me you've lost 100 full-time positions to restraint.
Yes, in the last
Are you
2 years.
actually? I remember you and Dr. Peterson being here and saying that you were then facing the possibility of active loss, a loss of a number of the key members of your staff by wage competition.
Well, as I said, we have fallen behind now from being up near the top several years ago and down to the second half of the Canadian universities. We have lost a few people at SFU. I understand UBC has lost a good deal more, but we're in a situation, and I'm not exaggerating at all, where we have a number of people, and these are people in areas where there are jobs. There are jobs in California, the Californians are recruiting. There are jobs in Ontario, the Ontario universities are recruiting. In areas like computing science, in business, in commerce, in marketing, in engineering science, in economics, in a number of areas, there is absolutely no way that these people are going to stay beyond another year. They love this province as I do. They want to stay. They
Does
believe
that mean
it will
therefore?
last.
Does that mean therefore you finish up if you have to rehire after losing people with second best choices?
Well, in those areas where there's a shortage of really qualified people, no question about it. And the other thing is you don't attract good people. We tried to get somebody in the business area a few months ago. There was a hot candidate in Alberta. We phoned him and he said, "What are you offering?" And he was at a lower rank, and he laughed. He said, "I'm making 20% more than that now. What are you kidding? Are you kidding me?"
Now, one thing which I've always accepted as fact, and perhaps you can give me the provincial government response, is that the federal contribution towards secondary education is not being properly passed along to universities, but being absorbed in general revenue of the government. That is your position, is it not?
Well, it is a fact that in this country, federal government monies now form the majority of monies in all universities across the country. In the last 2 or 3 years, the funds that have been transferred from Ottawa to Victoria, earmarked for higher education, either have not been transferred on, or the remaining portion, which is now only, I understand, about 20% out of provincial revenues, has been decreased correspondingly. It's an apple or orange kind of situation. But we estimate now that about 80% of the funds in the 3 universities of British Columbia come from Ottawa. Last year, we had a 5% reduction in our budget at the same time that Ottawa transfer payments were, of course, a major increase.
You haven't had any promises from Mr. Bennett that he might readjust these transfer payments back through the universities and increase your budgets?
No, I understand on the transfer payments that long before I came to this province, the W.A.C. Bennett government decided that transfer payments went into general government revenue.
Correct.
I further understand that the NDP government did not change that, and the current government has not changed it. So these transfer payments, they put into government revenue, and then they make their decisions. I have had conversations with Mr. Bennett. He's listened attentively. We've engaged in good argument. I think personally he is going to be as more supportive of the universities, but we've not discussed or he's not made any commitments in this area.
So the future is bleak in 2 or 3 areas. The future is bleak in your finances. The future is bleak in your hiring prospects of getting the best people. The future is bleak in the fact that you may lose many of your best people, and the quality of teaching will suffer.
No question about that, and the future is bleakest of all in terms of the access of students who want to come and who are now not coming because of the combination of relatively few jobs, because of the general economic climate, the fact that the government took away student grants, and the fact that we simply had to put up tuition by the amounts I indicated. That has accounted for just a dramatic drop-off in first-year enrollment, particularly from communities that are beyond a 30-mile radius of either Vancouver or Victoria.
And the fees have gone up how much?
116% in the last 4 years, I guess it is.
If you have a valid point or question you want to throw at President Bill Saywell of Simon Fraser University, do it now, please. Succinctly, promptly, sharply, and brightly. After the break. Go ahead to Dr. Saywell.
Yes, Mr. Webster. I would like to ask Dr. Saywell if he could make a comment about the story that was in the Globe and Mail a couple days ago when a vice president of a major bank back east stood before a bunch of university presidents and criticized them heavily for tenure and a poor performance over the last 20 years and the quality of the students that are coming into the mainstream of
Did you see that?
The market, and really laid the lumber on them.
Okay.
I'm very reluctant to comment in detail on an address that I haven't read. I just read a very abbreviated news story. One of the things that was most interesting to me about that news story was the immediate announcement from the bank that that was a personal view and they weren't going to associate it with, which suggested to me that the individual took an extreme position that reasonable business leaders were not going to associate themselves with. I have no further comment because I haven't seen the address.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, why with all the foreign students that are in now, are we not charging those people what it really costs to educate them so that we're not subsidizing the foreign students at the expense of our own ones? God knows it's expensive enough in Hong Kong, etc. Thank you.
We, all three universities in British Columbia, have a differential fee. They charge foreign students, students on foreign visas, 1.5 times or 2.5 times the fee of Canadian citizens and landed immigrants. We also at Simon Fraser have a quota of up to 7% of the enrollment can be students from abroad. I think those are responsible positions to take. We in this country and in this province, particularly on the Pacific Rim, are a trading nation, and if we're not prepared to take some responsible position on the education of people from part of that world, we're cutting our own throats.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a quick suggestion for Dr. Saywell, how the sports program may be able to raise a little money. Why not have alumnus of the various sports make arrangements during their membership in the team to, upon successful completion, and for instance, a number of them got Olympic medals, they can do endorsements.
Okay, he says commercials for sporting people to help the...
Great idea. You know, I get lots of criticism. I sure welcome positive suggestions. Thanks very much.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, maybe you and Dr. Saywell can comment on the fact that if you take a look at the structure of the cabinet over in Victoria, and at the Premier himself, a good percentage of them have never attended a higher learning institute, so maybe their attitudes are based on they're not really too familiar with what goes on there, so it's just dollars and cents to them. They've got a cash register for a heart there.
You comment first.
I have never believed that because individuals have not had a university education that they are therefore by definition less appreciative of an education. We have had people on our board of governors from the business community who once they get to know the university at first hand are our greatest supporters and supporters of higher education. I would welcome any cabinet minister who would like to know our institution better than he or she now does to come, and I'll show them around the lab, show them some of the exciting and truly great things that are happening.
Go ahead from Powell River.
With the federal and provincial governments pushing the economics of Canada to all of the Pacific Rim countries, etc., how can we turn around and cut the education budget in the areas of languages, etc.? If we can't talk to them, we sure as hell can't...
trade with them.
That's right.
In the area of language change, which is in the area of Russian and German, not any Pacific Rim languages, we just did an analysis of the demand, which was extremely low. There are these programs at the University of British Columbia. We will probably continue some language. We're certainly continuing some language instruction, so it's not the end of the world in that sense.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I've been a student for several years. I've had to drop out due to the economic crunch. My girlfriend's still hanging in. She's a single parent. I want to know what counsel anyone has for students that are in this system that are incurring these large loans. I don't have any hope of even starting to pay mine back. The interest is, you know, building up day by day. What's going to happen when these students
can no longer go to school. How are they going to pay back their loans? What type of pressure are they going to be under?
The human pressure in terms of conditions like you're mentioning is just tremendous, and I wish I had something positive and optimistic and good to say to you. If I'm honest with myself, I don't, and I'm sorry about it.
Do you happen to know how much the grants were in terms of dollars? Was that a big amount that the provincial government cut out?
Oh, yes, several millions of dollars.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, as a student, I'm kind of concerned with all the grants being cut out because I moved out here to go to Simon Fraser University, but I'm also aware that the university offers large numbers of grants to the pipe band. In fact, I've understood that the Simon Fraser University pipe band's been given a grant of a figure around $10,000 to go to Scotland, and what about the people that want to go to school?
There is a modest amount of about the amount you indicate that's been supporting the SFU pipe brand, which has brought international distinction to Simon Fraser University, which in return has brought all kinds of private donations into the university, some of which go into student bursaries and scholarships. There's not an immediate direct trade-off between the two. On the student grant and student loan and bursary issue, SFU has one of the highest levels in this country of holdback from tuition fees to put into bursaries and into scholarships. We hold back out of every dollar about 25 cents for that purpose, and we're going to continue to do that. We're doing all we can to make up for the lack of government assistance in that way.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, just a quick word in defense of the arts, given that you opened with a big story on the Athletic Centre. The arts account for 2.4% of Canada's gross national product, yet a lot of attention seems to be paid to the cuts at the athletic program. I'm just wondering, Dr. Saywell, I wanted to clarify something. Is it not true that, in fact, it's not a third of the Centre for the Arts budget that is being cut, but 50% of the actual academic budget, that is faculty and teaching programs?
It hasn't yet been decided. We've given some terms of reference to the Center for the Arts as to how they're going to go about choosing what to eliminate, but it's approximately a third of the academic budget.
Is it not true as well that some of that 40% that's being asked to be cut from athletics has in fact already been cut over the past couple of years?
There have been additional cuts there over the past few years, as there has been virtually in every part of the university. Yes, that is true.
Well, there we must leave you with a pretty tough job, trying to keep a high standard of education at the university with a lower standard of money all the time. But it's up to you to sell it to politicians. It's up to you.
It's up to you to help, and you are. Thank you.
My thanks to Bill Saywell. Next, George Van Roggen, Senator, Chairman, Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. A real live, talkative senator who will show you that he earns his money. After the break. George Van Roggen won't mind if I say, not even sardonically, that there are times when senators make valuable contributions to the political affairs of the nation. You would accept that, wouldn't you?
I certainly will.
How long have you been in the Senate, George?
Oh, what is it, 12 years?
12 years. Now, in 1982, you brought down a report recommending, no nonsense about it, free trade with the Yanks, correct?
That's correct.
Fell into the public hand like a lead balloon, didn't it?
Well, it had a certain impact in academic and economic circles and so on, but not something that the government just leapt on.
Why did I call you yesterday and say, George, come on the program because we got to learn about free trade. Maybe free trade can save us from the economic disaster we seem to be edging into.
Well, Jack, I can use a chauvinistic remark talking to a fellow like you, but I remember saying in speeches years ago that it was a subject you couldn't raise when the ladies were present. Now it's become very respectable. And you'll have seen in the press in the last number of months, article after article about sectoral negotiations on Canada-U.S. trade, about the new Trade Act put through the U.S. Congress authorizing the administration to negotiate a free trade agreement with Canada, talk about whether we should go across the board, free trade or sectoral. The thing is coming on like gangbusters, and I'm glad I was able to possibly get that started.
Well, just a minute, let me see. Did you say that the U.S. Congress has passed a resolution recommending the studying of the possibility of free trade with Canada?
That's included in the recent Trade Act passed by the U.S. Congress.
All right, and you broke that into two things, bilateral free trade, all the lot, or what you called sectoral. What is sectoral free trade?
Well, some people have advocated, I personally don't think it'll work too well and be too difficult to negotiate, that you have bilateral free trade between the two countries just on a selection of areas such as petrochemicals, as we already have in the Auto Pact. Now, the Auto Pact's not a pure free trade arrangement, but is basically a free trade arrangement. And the last government, under Trade Minister Ed Lumley, opened up sectoral trade negotiations with the United States, and they're discussing a number of sectors and seeing if they can get those going on a free trade basis.
All right, let's get down to the very basics. So, free trade with the United States, said Webster provocatively, would mean death and destruction to any secondary industries in Canada because of the vast manufacturing power of the head office plants in the United States.
Well, of course, the argument in my report is exactly the opposite. And if you don't like an academic discussion, look at some practical examples around the world where Finland, with 3 million people, has free trade agreements with all its European trading partners in the common market. Norway, not a member of the common market, has free trade agreement with the common market. Every single nation in Europe has a free trade agreement with the common market that's not a member of it. Ireland has a free trade agreement with Britain, has had for 15 years. It has not destroyed the cultural independence of Ireland.
But wouldn't it wipe out any possibility of major, or would it restrict us to the one specialty areas or the specialty areas where we can be equally efficient as the Americans?
Well, the point is, Jack, that with the Europeans have 350 million people in a home market. The Americans 250 million in a home market. The Japanese 100 million more in a home market. We have 25 million. It's not a large enough market to be able to manufacture efficiently in. And therefore you need access to a larger market to have efficient production runs and to rationalize your manufacturing sector. We can't do it so long as we're only operating within Canada. We've got to operate in a mode where we're in a large enough market that we can be competitive with our main competitors, the Europeans, the Americans, and the Japanese.
So say with the Australians and the New Zealanders, Canada's probably the only sophisticated nation restricted to its own markets for developing its own industries.
That's correct. Even the Australians and New Zealanders have a free trade agreement between the two of them.
But we have no free trade agreements with anyone?
Not with anybody.
Well, now, what would the economic disruptions be, though?
Oh, they'd be substantial, but all free trade agreements in the past have been phased in over a 10-year period so that the marketplace takes care of the adjustments over a period of time. This has proven the case in Europe and so on, where but the point, Jack, is not free trade or the status quo, because the status quo is not working. And therefore...
We're their biggest customers.
Yes, we are. We're the Americans' biggest customers, and they're ours.
They're our biggest
You know,
customers.
of our trade with the world, Jack, and we're a huge trading nation, as you know, 73% of all of our exports go to the United States.
So when the elephant falls asleep, we die.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is that our trade with Europe, which is about 10% of our trade, our exports, is mostly in resource products. In Japan, it's nearly all resource products only. The United States is the only trading partner we have that takes our manufactured goods. It takes 68% of its imports from Canada in manufactured goods.
It seems to be quite simple. Was there not a suggestion at one time that we become part of the common market?
Oh, that was never seriously suggested. First, it would be against the rules of the Treaty of Rome. It wouldn't work by a country mile. I never heard anybody knowledgeable in the area seriously suggest it.
All right, now, free trade with the United States would be phased in over a period. How would you phase it in? By reducing tariffs, first of all?
Well, Jack, the problem at the moment is that tariffs have come down, or will have come down by 1987 under the last round of the GATT, you know, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, to such low levels that tariffs are not really the problem now. Non-tariff barriers are the problem. In the past, when tariffs were higher and countries entered into free trade agreements, they would typically take them down. The tariff, if it was 20%, they'd take it down 2% a year for 10 years to zero. And you could adjust each year by 2%. Right now, the main reason for having an across-the-board free trade agreement with the United States is to get a hold of the non-tariff barriers that are rearing their heads all the time because of the tariffs coming down as low as they have under the GATT.
You know what I'm afraid of? I'm not afraid of maintaining our sovereignty. We could maintain our sovereignty regardless. But wouldn't the Americans get kind of economic control of the continent and come up with the hairy old schemes that they still want to do to flood the Rocky Mountain Trench, etc., to get our water? Am I being particularly chauvinistic on that?
No, you're not, but you're addressing things that are not subject of tariffs and non-tariff barriers. Nothing in a free trade agreement requires you to sell anything. It doesn't impinge on things where there are no tariffs anyway, where there are not insofar as most resource exports are concerned. Nothing in a free trade agreement requires you to export energy or export oil or do anything of that sort. The free trade agreement is really aimed at the manufacturing sector rather than the resource sector.
Okay, let me test something for you. It's a common market.
No, it's not. A free trade agreement and a common market are two different things. A common market has extra elements of free movement of labor and capital that you don't have in a free trade agreement.
It's a pooling of energy resources where they'd get at us.
No tariffs on energy resources, therefore it doesn't apply. You have exactly the same regulatory authority as you do today as far as energy is concerned.
Might lead to political integration and total free movement of people across the border, importing all, for instance, their colored problems.
This is argued by a lot of people, but Professor Peyton Lyon, who's an authority on this subject, after a study of all the free trade agreements around the world, came out in evidence before our committee and said there is not a, if I could quote from it, there is not a single case of this ever having happened.
Never.
Never.
George
George Van
Roggen. Go ahead, finish this sentence.
I simply finished by saying if Ireland, Southern Ireland, has a free trade agreement with Britain, it's pretty, for 15 years, it's pretty good evidence that you're not going to be culturally dominated or absorbed.
Yeah, I suppose, but the Irish are kind of different.
Well, hopefully
we're already culturally dominated by the United States.
Without a free trade agreement, I think we'd be less dominated if we had a strong manufacturing sector.
People ask me why I'm not on at night times, you know, Canadian show.
You're
and
too
Canadian
old, aren't
station. Let's not get into that caper. The fact is that we're so culturally dominated by all the American signals, it'd be very tough to maintain a heavy news program at night. We're dominated culturally by the Yanks.
Oh, I've maintained for years that the CBC should, instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to imitate the Americans in soap operas, should spend the money on Canadian programs and Canadian news programs and programs concerning Canada, rather than competing in every other area they can, where they can't do it properly. But that's another story. That's your business, not
Yeah,
mine.
perhaps once, what's his name, gets thrown out. What's his name, quick? When Juno gets replaced, things will be different. Maybe. George Van Roggen, calls on free trade. You probably know more about it than I do. It may be our economic salvation. After the break. A very basic question to Senator George Van Roggen, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Free Trade, which recommended free trade with the United States. What would it specifically do for Western Canada?
Well, of course, Jack, one of the great problems in Western Canada, I was brought up on my father's knee cursing the high tariffs of Eastern Canada, which concentrated all of the manufacturing in Canada in Central Canada. And if you want to get manufacturing as opposed to resource industries only in British Columbia, you need access to a larger market. You can't start shipping widgets all the way to Toronto. You've got to be able to export them into the States. That you can do with a free trade agreement.
Well,
and the Japanese, for instance, putting plants in North America, would start putting them in Canada as well as California on the West Coast.
Well, you know, old W.A.C. Bennett, who wasn't a particular friend of yours, used to lecture us all the time that trade moves north and south, north and south. And he was a proponent of free trade.
In those days, there wasn't a Westerner living that didn't understand that free trade would be a benefit to Western Canada.
Don't forget, your generation is kind of, you know, dying out a bit. But there is this basic resentment against the tariff protectionism for Eastern Ontario industry, Quebec and Ontario.
That's right.
Which puts up the price of everything here.
That's why a refrigerator in Vancouver costs 1.5 times what it costs in Bellingham.
And why it doesn't, but the fact that a dozen eggs costs half here, half there that it costs here.
Oh, well, that's a marketing board. That's another problem, really.
Yeah.
That's not tariffs.
No, I'm afraid not. Let's go to some calls. I had another question. What the hell was it? I forget it. Victoria. Go ahead from Victoria to Senator Van Roggen.
Good morning. Good morning. I'd just like to make a couple of points and then ask a question and then I'll hang up.
Right.
Our industry, historically, our total industries have been dominated, foreign dominated, U.S. included. Our most important resource, which I think is our fuel, through Petrocan is now becoming a little more Canadian controlled. I, for one, happen to just firmly endorse it. I think our resources should be owned by the parent, by the country, not by foreign corporations.
What's your question?
And one more point: our manufacturing, and I think it's all related, Jack. That's the reason I'm making this. Our manufacturing sector is still currently very much dominated, foreign controlled, And I wonder how many of our unemployed at the moment are unemployed because the home country has taken back their manufacturing that they had set up here in Canada, because their allegiance is to the home country, not to Canada.
Fair enough. What do you think?
Well, studies have been done on the number of jobs as a result of the recession that have gone back, been taken back to the States or taken back to Canada, and they approximately balance out. If I could just say this to the caller, that we in Canada have designed our own manufacturing sector. We have designed the branch plant economy. Somebody has not imposed it on us. The tariff structure we had, which used to be very high, like 40%, required every American or foreign company that wanted to do business in Canada to jump over the border and put a plant in Canada. That created the branch plant economy. It was our doing. What I'm wanting us to do is develop, have a large enough market so that Canadian companies can become world scale.
That's the basic point. I'd forgotten that. It was our tariffs and our protectionism which made them establish their profitable subsidiaries here.
I wish I had time to go into some of the testimony of the multinationals before my committee. But one after another made it clear that they established their plant in Canada to look after the Canadian market only. That once the tariffs went down under the GATT, as low as they are now, and they started finding that they were not making the money they used to make in Canada.
They closed the plant.
No, they did not. They started to go to world mandate. You may have heard the term world mandate. Canadian General Electric is one example. After a lot of arguing with the Home Office, got permission to service a few products instead of one of everything for Canada. A few products for the whole world out of the Canadian plant. And it started to make more money than it was before.
Isn't that partly the basis, reasoning behind the Auto Pact?
Well, the Auto Pact is yes, it's not a pure free trade arrangement. It's basically a free trade arrangement. And you have one plant running efficient runs of hundreds of thousands of cars for the whole North American market instead of just the Canadian market.
Political question. Your successor's government, man by the name of Mulroney or something, has clamped down in FARA, calling it Investment Canada and saying, come in and buy up the country. Well, is that good?
Well, firstly, I don't think he's gone that far. They changed the name of it. They said they wanted to have more encouragement to foreign investment in Canada, and I don't see anything wrong with that. People don't, I think, focus on the fact that FARA's job is not to reject foreign investment. It is to make sure that it comes in a form that is of benefit to Canada. And they do a great deal along those lines, and I think you're going to see the Conservatives retain FARA for that purpose. FARA, however, should not be muddled up in a free trade discussion or argument because it's not to do with tariffs and non-tariff barriers.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Well, anybody that wants to keep a nationalistic attitude towards Canada is welcome to it. The fact of the matter is, my friend, is that we are 6 to 8 months behind the American market, and as the gentleman, as the senator said, a refrigerator costs $100 here, and you can buy it for $75 or $50 in that sort of proportion in Bellingham. I know for a fact that, oh, I can't, can I mention a brand name?
Sure.
Okay, Forsheim shoes.
Yeah.
Okay. They cost me somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 to $100 here in Vancouver. I can pick them up in Bellingham for $49.95 American. Now throw 20% on top of that to make up the difference between the Canadian and American dollar, and dream on.
Well, what are you telling me? That you want free trade?
Oh, definitely, sir.
Okay, there you are.
Well, that's the whole name of the game, is to increase our standard of living and make ourselves more efficient, not only in the American market, but so we compete with the Americans in Europe and Japan and around the world.
There was much teething trouble in Britain on that very point in the common market when the more efficient French producers and whatnot flooded into Britain and the stodgy old Brits were left high and dry for some time.
This is not an easy world, Jack. It's a competitive world, and we better get competitive also.
Well, but Canadians have forgotten it's a competitive world.
Oh, but they're learning now.
It's a world of anticipated affluence automatically from the age of 1 on.
Not the last couple of years.
No, it's changing.
It's changing.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
I'm sitting here watching this show and wondering how you could start to have free trade when we're working with a 70-cent dollar.
Oh, yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Oh, well, the 70-cent dollar, of course, is a great advantage to Canada insofar as its exports are concerned. Because if our dollar is lower than the American dollar, we have a 30% advantage or 25% advantage in exporting into the United States. The value of the dollar, as a matter of fact, if you had a free trade agreement with the United States, would be the main moderator insofar as keeping your exports and imports in balance.
Would you like to see a 60-cent dollar?
No, because that means a lower standard of living for Canadians.
The cost of the necessary imports goes up so much.
You see, we import such a proportion of our standard of living that when the dollar goes down, it costs more to...
George, how is this going to surface again, apart from media attention? Is there any political party in Canada committed to pick up this invitation from the States to discuss and think about free trade, be it across the board or sectorally?
Yeah. Well, let me go back quickly to 1911 when they fought the reciprocity election. You remember that one. On the subject of free trade of the States and the Grits, the Liberals got beaten by the Conservatives who were opposed to it. Now, that's frightened off politicians every year for the last 70 years. However, with the former Liberal government having initiated the sectoral negotiations with the United States, with the present Conservative government, including people like Crosby, who is for free trade across the board, Mike Wilson, who fully supports, as Minister of Finance, fully supports the sectoral negotiations, I think it has now come to the point where it's no longer a partisan issue, which is a good thing, because the rhetoric won't get in the way of the negotiations. And I think you're going to see a bipartisan approach to these negotiations with the United States, and I think for a lot of technical reasons that they have to go to across-the-board mode rather than sectoral mode if they're going to succeed.
This will be the first bipartisan approach on an economic problem for a long time in this country.
It may be one of the first hard-headed approaches on any economic problem, partisan or not, for a long time in this country.
My thanks to Senator George Van Roggen. You've got, what, 12 years to go still in the Senate?
About 12, yes.
About 12. Not a bad life, is it?
Well, I tell you, it's very interesting, fascinating. You don't make much money at it compared to you or law, you know, which I was in before.
But it's not bad. You work quite hard at it. You go steadily all the time.
Oh, I commute down to Ottawa regularly when the House is sitting. Yes, yeah. It's a long commute.
Well, my thanks to a bit of an eye-opener from Senator George Van Roggen. And I shall be back with my friend from the International Brigade after the break. My next guest takes me back with some nostalgia to the 30s, when any politically conscious person left of centre in the United Kingdom knew well that the Great War was coming, World War II was coming, because of the incredible attack by the Nazis and the fascists on the democratically elected Republican government of Spain. And out of that came the testing ground for the Nazis at Guernica, the Stuka dive bombers, the Italians, who I think had already been in Abyssinia gassing the natives at that particular time, and came an organization called the International Brigade, which fought on the side of the Spanish Republicans. And here with me now is Bill Alexander, who's a former commander of the British Battalion in Spain, which was, I think, a major part of the International Brigade. How big was the International Brigade and who was in it?
There was about 32,000 altogether, and they came from nearly every country in the world.
But the Brits were the biggest single contingent?
No, we can't claim that. I think the French were probably the biggest. There were Germans who'd escaped from Hitler's concentration camps. And there was even 12 from San Marino.
Is that so?
And we had one from Hong Kong.
And there were the Americans, and there was, of course, the Mackenzie-Papineau Battalion from Canada.
They were indeed. The Mackenzie-Papineau often fought side by side with us Brits, as you call us.
Are there any of the old Mac-Pap people still alive around here? I interviewed some a couple of years ago. Mind you, you're not that old. How old are you?
I'm 74.
So you were in your mid-20s when you...
That's right, I was.
Skipped across to Spain and joined up as an untrained volunteer?
I was untrained. It was illegal to go, but there were weekend trips to Paris. And so that's how we got over the Channel into France, climbed over the Pyrenees, and then into Spain.
And into Spain. And you were... How did the Spanish Republicans welcome you at first? Had the fighting broken out when the International Brigade began to be formed?
Yes, the fighting had been going on for 2 or 3 months. And in fact, the fascists were already in the suburbs of Madrid, in the university city, or the campus there. And then the first International Brigades went in. Many of them were trained men, and they were, with the help of the Spanish army, they were able to stop Franco right in the center of Madrid.
You better give the picture, though, because They don't even teach Second World War, far less the Spanish Republican War. The picture was that a Republican president, a Republican government headed by who?
Ezana.
Was elected.
That's right, yes.
And then Franco arose and used the power of the army to try and squash the elected government.
That's right, but after the first 2 or 3 days, Hitler and Mussolini sent their planes, their bombers, their artillery, and their soldiers to help Franco. If it hadn't been for that help, then the Republic would have won.
No doubt about that.
No doubt at all.
The Italians sent masses of men, did they not?
They sent whole regular divisions of their army, the Italian fascist army.
Fascisti, they call them.
Fascisti, indeed, yes.
I always remember seeing the news coverage of, what was the name of the famous town which was used as a testing ground for slaughter from the air?
Guernica.
Guernica. Where was that in Spain?
That was towards the north, towards the Pyrenees.
But the big dramatic battles, were they all around Madrid?
They were mainly around Madrid. But after the first big battles, Madrid never fell. The fascists couldn't take it. And so they attacked further to the north. And as you said, Hitler experimented with the blitzkrieg. That is where an armored column dives straight through the enemy lines and keeps going. That's what he used in France and Poland in World War II.
As I recall, the performance of the British and French governments was somewhat less than desirable. Do you remember all that stuff about, was it the Hoare-Laval Pact?
No, but you've understated what the British and French governments did. They prevented the Spanish government buying arms, which they were legally entitled to do. On the other hand, on the side of Franco, the Germans and Italians poured in regular armies, unlimited arms and supplies. So it was called the non-intervention agreement, but in fact, it was intervention on the side of Franco, non-intervention on the side of the Republic.
One mustn't forget, though, that in those years and in later years, there was a very influential crowd of British aristocracy and right-wingers who had made a deal with Hitler in 5 seconds flat. Am I not correct?
You are correct indeed. Chamberlain, he went to Munich and sold out to Hitler. And when he did that, World War II became inevitable.
Now, the British International Brigade, how many were in the British Battalion?
2,110.
How many survived?
Well, there were 526 killed in Spain. That's roughly one out
4.
of every 4. Nearly everyone who wasn't killed was wounded at least once.
You too?
I was wounded indeed.
The fighting began in 1936?
Yes.
Finished in
1939.
Just before the war?
World War II began 5 months after Franco won.
Do you ever regret it?
Not on your life. I regard it as one of the important stages in my life, and I'm proud that I stood up at what was an important time, not only in my life, but I believe in the life of all progressive people.
Yeah, so this is your life, Bill Alexander. You went on from there to serve in the British Army in the Second World War.
I did, indeed.
Well, well, well. Let's see if we can raise any of the old Mac-Pap people. Mackenzie Papineau Battalion. Any survivors around of the Canadian contingent that fought in the Spanish Republican War 1936-1939? Take calls on it. This is a social studies lesson for lots of you people who'd never heard of Guernica. None of my crew, I think, well, one, had heard of Guernica, to their eternal shame. After the break. Well, Bill Alexander, got a couple of calls here. I don't know if there are any Mac-Pap people. You take the calls and reply to that camera. Go ahead to Bill Alexander.
Hello, Bill. This is Wally. We spoke yesterday.
Wally.
Yeah.
Are you a survivor, Bill? Wally?
Yeah, I am. I'm a veteran.
Of the MacPap Battalion?
Yes.
How old are you now?
73.
Did you ever meet him in Spain?
No, I never met him in Spain. I never met Wally there.
Did you ever meet any Canadians in Spain?
Indeed, I met quite a number.
What's your most graphic memory of those dreadful days in Spain, Wally?
Well, here's one of the things I thought Bill should have mentioned. The Republican government was a very popular government, and the fascists were, in fact, defeated shortly after they started their nonsense, or their rebellion. The thing is that what then happened is that the German and Italian navies helped to escort the Moors into Spain. And it was a lot of the Moorish and the German and Italian armies, which were not Spaniards, that helped to defeat the Spanish Republican government.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was a war of intervention, actually. They were supposed to be non-intervention, but it was actually a war of intervention.
Yeah, good. Well, how are you keeping anyway, Wally?
Oh, you know, I'm getting by.
Have you got a meeting here with the boys this time?
Yeah, we're going to have a concert one of these days in the near future, and we're, we're active in many.
All right, give me a call and I'll give you a plug. I'm much obliged, Wally.
Thank you very much.
God bless. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Alexander.
That's you.
Hello, is this Bill Alexander?
Indeed.
Okay. I was wondering if you'd like to know the story about the town that you were talking about, Guernica, which was the ancient Basque town.
Yes, carry on.
All right. The story is that foreign correspondents originally described the town being destroyed by German bombers and by the nationalists under Franco. This was in March of 1937, and those were stories put in by George Steer, who was a correspondent of the Times of London. And he described driving a car towards the town and stopping just outside and watching 6 Henkel 51 bombers bomb and strafe the town. And he also described being strafed by the bombers for 15 minutes afterwards. And it was subsequently shown when the Franco forces, the Republican forces, entered the town 2 months later, that and they had foreign correspondents with them, that there were no craters at all that would have occurred from bombs.
I knew this was coming.
The town had been destroyed by Republicans.
Oh, yeah, of course it was. Of course it was. You always get the fascist propaganda. They'll always stick their necks up and tell you lies.
And if you care to look up some of the records of the Condor Legion, that was Hitler's bombers, they not only claim credit for it, but they use the same tactics when they bombed Coventry and London later on in World War II.
I wonder how a guy could be so stupid. Go ahead, please.
Jack?
Yes.
I would like to say thank you to Mr. Alexander, Bill Alexander.
Go ahead.
Hello, Bill.
Hello there.
I was not a combatant that time, but I know some of you friends. I am the little boy who was saved by a MacPap and wrote recently a book about the MacPaps. That all soldiers, you more likely are aware.
Do you understand him?
You have there in Britain, you have a gentleman, a comrade of you, Colin Maxim.
Colin Maxim.
Yes.
Well, this is...
Bates and so on. They received my book, talking about the Battle of the Ebro and what happened on. And I live in Vancouver, and I want to say hello now, since you are here, and that illustrious man we have, Jack Webster.
Here.
Well,
thank you for going to help us.
This is the chap who was rescued, right, by somebody from the MacPap and came to Canada because of that.
Right. You have read the story, eh?
Yes, yes. Muchas gracias.
Bienvenido. Gracias a usted.
Hasta la vista.
Hasta la vista.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, my name is, glad to see you, Bill.
Glad to see you,
Yes.
or at least hear
I'm
you.
one of the few Brits that are still surviving. I was over in Spain this year, and I've just read your book, which is quite a good one. I was with Yank Levy and young...
Who are you with?
Yank Levy, Harold Fry, and young Rutherford. I was taken prisoner at...
Harama.
Yeah, at Karama in 1937.
What's your name?
My name is Stan Giles.
Sven Giles.
Stan Giles. I live in Coquitlam.
And you'll be in your 70s now, too?
No, negative. I was only 19 when I was there. I'm 67, going on 68.
Oh, you're just a boy.
I was only 19, yeah.
Well, Sven, you're not having a meeting of people today or tomorrow or anything, are you?
Say again?
Tomorrow we're having a meeting.
Where?
Whereabouts?
I'm not quite sure yet. I do what I'm told.
Don't we know what a meeting is? Well, we'll put it on the air where the meeting is if somebody will phone us before 10:30 and tell us, or if we can phone our contact, Mr. Alexander.
Well, I heard that there's an anniversary coming up in the next year somewhere.
Yes, in 1986 was the 50th anniversary of the start of the war, and we hope that those of us who can walk or be put in wheelchairs will be out there in Madrid.
Okay.
Okay.
You keep watching and I'll have that information for you before the end of the program. Bill's going to stay here with a bit of a free-for-all and take some calls. And that guy with his nonsense from the fascist side can go jump in the lake. I'm being rude to you, Mac. Don't call me again. After the break. I'm sorry, there isn't a public gathering at all, but next time Bill comes back, there will be. Now, where am I going? Go ahead to Bill Alexander. Oh, I wanted to ask you, how did the Brits treat you? You came back wounded from Spain when, in 38?
Yes.
How did the Brits treat you when you got back? As if you had the plague?
Well, the British Army did it first, but once I got in, especially when I got into a fighting unit and went abroad to North Africa, then they gave me a very good welcome indeed.
Yeah, because you had lots of experience in the line.
Indeed,
What
yes.
kind of equipment did you have?
What, in Spain?
In Spain, yeah.
Well, we had rifles, we had a heavy machine gun.
Vickers?
I started off serving in a little anti-tank battery. They were guns sent from the Soviet Union.
2-pounders?
No, a little bit bigger. But in fact, Jack, they were better than the guns you had later on in the desert.
In the Second
They
World
were
War?
very good, in World War II, yes.
So you got Russian equipment eventually?
That's right, yes. Not enough, but what we had was good.
And you had Russian advisors. Were they in great numbers?
No, at the most they say there were 600 or 800. For example, when we got these new anti-tank guns, I'd never seen one before. I didn't know how to keep it going and so on. They had to tell us.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
There is a question for Mr. Alexander. What is the position of your government vis-a-vis to your status as defenders of democracy? Do you and your companions have been recognized by the government of England for having been the first ones to fight fascism and National Socialism on the soil of Spain? Please?
No, we get no official recognition from the government. But what is happening now, a number of the big cities in Britain, that's England, Scotland and Wales, are putting up memorials to those who went to fight. And in fact, the Greater London Council has helped with some money and a site. It's bang opposite the House of Commons on the other side of the Thames. And I hope that when Margaret Thatcher looks out of her window across the Thames, she'll think of us.
That's Ken Livingstone and the GLC.
Indeed, they are.
But he'll do anything to infuriate Margaret Thatcher.
He will indeed.
But you never did get any recognition, and you got no help for war wounds or anything.
No, on the contrary.
Thank you very much, sir.
May I say something else, please?
Yes.
If I ask that question, it's because I know for sure, I am Spanish myself, and I know that the government of Canada did not reach at least just a little bit of what England has done for the ex-volunteers defending democracy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye. Two calls we've had from former Spaniards. From Britannia Beach, go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
My father, he fought in the International Brigade there. He's dead now. He died a few years ago. But he told me a story about a fella that's from England that was responsible for getting quite a few prisoners of war out of the country. I wonder if your guest there has any...
Have you got a name?
It's about his... No, I can't remember his name, Jack. This was many years ago I heard this.
A few prisoners of war out of Spain?
Yes.
After the war?
After the war and during the war, I believe, too. The gentleman resided in some islands off the south part of England. He may be dead now. It's quite a few years ago. I just wondered if he...
Do you know who he's talking about, Willie?
No, I'm afraid I don't. But we were able to help quite a number who'd been forced over the Pyrenees into France. In fact, we helped to raise the money to send a whole shipload over to Mexico where they were able to settle down.
You're talking about Spanish refugees from
Spanish and International Brigaders, because of course they couldn't, the Germans couldn't go back to Hitler.
No.
The Italians couldn't go back to Mussolini.
Mm-hmm. Tough days these were. Where am I going? How much time have we got? 30 seconds. Well, Bill, is your book available around here at all? No.
Well, I brought over a few copies, but I'll tell my publishers that please send some over to Vancouver.
You'd only sell them to old jostlers like me who've even heard of Guernica. Anyway, the book is called British Volunteers for Liberty. My guest is Bill Alexander, now 74, former commander of the British Battalion in Spain, part of the International Brigade. Have a good time anyway.
Thank you very much.
My thanks to Bill Hamilton. I'll be back, I'm almost sure, after the break. The man from Quadra will be here on Friday morning, I must say that. John Turner. Wonder how he survived the humiliation of being a minor functionary in the House of Commons as leader of the opposition. With a corporal's guard, said he. John Turner's here Friday morning. That should be good fun. Tomorrow I've got the British High Commissioner to Canada, Sir Derek Day. And I'm going to do a program on all the criminals that are allowed to go free without prosecution. 9 a.m. precisely. The effect of Socrad slashes on SFU, and check at midnight. How many criminals go free without trial in BC? At 9 a.m. precisely.